my favorite politician I ever had, the next leader of the Conservative Party, and your next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Polievre.
Great to be here in the Miramichi and with my great friend here, Jake Stewart. And is Tilly O'Neill-Gordon here as well? Where's Tilly? There she is. Don't be silly, vote for Tilly. Her old slogan. It's so good to see you, Tilly. You know, it's been too long. Well, been about a month and a half now, right? I was back here a little while ago. You know, when she first came to Parliament, we helped each other out a little bit. We both came to each other's rescue. She was giving her first speech on the floor of the House of Commons. And all of a sudden, she knocked over her podium, and her speech went everywhere. So I arranged a 5-minute standing ovation while she got her notes back in order so that she could start giving her speech. But a little later on, I was getting into some trouble because I was a young man, very young, and of course when you're a young man in a hurry you think you know everything. I was speaking too much. And so Prime Minister Harper pulled Tilly aside and he said, "Tilly, I know that Pierre will listen to you. Can you pull him aside for a quiet moment of prayer, get him in line, make him behave a little bit?" So I came to her office. I came to her office, and she sat me down. She said, "Pierre, you see that fish on the wall? It's caught in the Miramichi River. You know something about that fish? If he kept his mouth shut, he'd still be alive." And that was all that she needed to say. So it's a lot of good wisdom, eh? Yeah. So it's great to have Tilly here. In fact, another great moment also involves fish. She was on the Fisheries Committee. And one day, this fisherman came in. And he was testifying. He was really emotional about how badly his life was and how badly things were going. And he said the problem is that his individual quota was too low. He said, I know, I'm getting to that, Tilly. Jeez, she's heckling me like it's the House of Commons in here, for God's sakes. And she's a former school teacher, of all things. What are the children going to think, Tilly? So here she is. She's sitting in the committee, and he's saying, my individual quota is too low. It's too low. You have to pass a law to raise it back up. Except he didn't actually say the word individual quota. He used the acronym IQ. And so Tilly said to him, "Now you listen here, love, I'd like to help you, but if your IQ is too low to be a good fisherman, there's no law I can pass to change that." Oh my God, we do miss you on Parliament Hill, Tilly. But the good thing we have such a great member of Parliament in Jake Stewart. Jake is a real fighter on behalf of the people. He stood up for his people when he was in the legislature. He's famous for championing our First Nations and their rights. He's a great outdoorsman, loves his snowmobile, loves to fish. He's a hockey dad. He's a great member of Parliament, and I'm proud to announce today that he's the chair of my New Brunswick campaign for Prime Minister. Thank you very much, sir. And Jake never stops campaigning. He's probably knocked on a few of your doors, eh? And he is famous for not wanting to stop. Actually, in the last election, the problem is the volunteers couldn't get him to quit at the end of the day. And so he'd go late into the night. And there was a moment, got awkward. He was knocking, and it was after 9 p.m., and his team said, Jake, you're going to anger people, you're going to start losing votes if you don't rein it in. And he said, no, I've got to do a few more doors. Finally, close to 10 o'clock, he's still going. Walks up to the door of a house where the lights are all out. He knocks on the door, and what do you know? Hi, folks, welcome. Good to see you here. He knocks on the door of this house. All of a sudden, baby's crying. 14-year-old girl comes running down, turns on the light, opens the door, and she said, my sisters are 1 year old, and they are triplets, and you just woke all three of them up. And she said, and my father is a 300-pound championship boxer, and he wants to have a word with you. And Jake said, that won't be necessary. I'm just going to move right along. You just tell him that his local Liberal candidate dropped by to say hello. Doesn't miss a beat. And when he was appointed, he was appointed as Shadow Minister of Revenue Canada. So, back in the olden days, we used to have the tax collector. Well, the tax collector, of course, goes back to biblical times. But the most famous tax collector is the Sheriff of Nottingham. So the critic and the official opposition holding the Sheriff of Nottingham accountable, of course, is Robin Hood. So you have your very own Robin Hood right here, standing up for the people. And boy, do we ever need it right now, don't we? I think the reason people came to this country over so many years is because they wanted to enjoy the freedom of making their own decisions and making their own way. They didn't want free stuff, they wanted freedom. Carve a little piece of paradise out of that big, flat piece of land and a few islands called Canada, right? And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the generations of Celtic peoples that came here 300 years ago, or my family, where my great-grandfather went from France to Saskatchewan back in the early 1900s, or my wife's family, which came as immigrants from Venezuela about 25 years ago. They always came for the same reason, the freedom to make their own decisions. In fact, Wilfrid Laurier was asked about 100 years ago, when he was Prime Minister, what is Canada's nationality? And of course, that had been an easy question to answer if he was in Europe, right? Because most countries there define their nationality on ethnicity. If you're France, it's French. Scotland, Scottish. Here in Canada, we were already mixed up. We had First Peoples, we had Scottish peoples, we had English, we had French. We had people already from Asia and Africa. So we did not define our nationality on ethnicity. So he said, Canada is free and freedom is its nationality. And so it is today. But lately, a lot of people don't feel so free. Whether it's the 14-year-old who suffered severe depression after being denied the chance to do sporting and social events with her friends for 2 years, or the small businessman demolished by one lockdown after another, or the lady who found out her mother was dying in Ontario here, and while she was living way over here in New Brunswick, and wasn't able to get on a plane to fly there because of a personal health care decision that caused her government to discriminate against her, forcing her to drive in freezing rain all day and all night in order to make it to bedside just in time to say one final goodbye. And that's just the restrictions and impositions on COVID. What about the economic freedoms that people feel like they've lost? The 32-year-old living in his mom's basement because he can't afford $868,000 for the typical home. Or the single mother who trembles as she walks down the grocery aisle because food prices have risen so fast that 4 out of 5 families have now cut the quality or quantity of their diet just to make ends meet. Or the working guy who can't go away hunting or fishing on the weekend because he can't afford $1.72 a liter for gas. Well, then there's the gatekeepers You know, the gatekeepers that block our First Nations from harvesting their own resources, controlling their own land, and keeping their own money, or block our immigrants from working in the very professions and trades for which they are trained, and prevent all of us from having the doctors and engineers that we could if they were given the license to do the job they were trained to do. Or the people banned from living in a neighborhood where there are jobs because building restrictions make it too hard to make affordable housing available. Or, of course, the attacks on our law-abiding firearms owners, our hunters and our sport shooters who are licensed and law-abiding, all the while governments let convicted gun criminals run free. These gatekeepers have really restricted our ability to live our lives and fulfill our potential. And that brings me to the reason I'm here today. You know, Mark Twain said, "The two most important days in your life are the day that you were born and the day you find out why you were born." The why, yes, you can apply that to your life. Which brings me to my why. Why am I running for Prime Minister? I am running for Prime Minister to make Canada the freest nation on earth and put you back in control of your life. And it starts with putting you back in control of your money. What is money, after all? It's just a technology for transporting value over space and time. It's what makes humans different economically than other creatures and species of the earth, right? All the creatures of the earth work for their living, right? But almost none of them can store the value of their work and transport it over space and time. They either eat what they kill on the spot, or it's spoiled or stolen. Other than chipmunks who can set aside a few nuts for later on, or the camel that can carry a bit of water in its hump, the vast majority of animals just have to consume what they make or take right on the spot. Whereas humans invented this idea called money, which is a lightweight technology to store the value of your labor, compress it, and take it from now till later, and from here until there. It allows us all to have freedom. We can exchange things with other people through the voluntary exchange of work for wages, product for payment, investment for interest. We are all able to get better off in a free market economy where seller and buyer each agree to the trade because it makes them both better off. You have an apple and I have an orange, and we each want the other. We trade. We still have an apple and an orange, but we're both better off because each has something worth more to him than he had before. It's why we have something called the double thank you. You know, you go to a coffee shop, you buy a coffee, you say thank you as you pay, and what do they say? Thank you. Not you're welcome. Thank you. Because the payment you made is worth more to them than the coffee, and the coffee you get, particularly at 6 in the morning, is worth more than the payment. So both people walk away from the transaction better off than they were before. That's the genius of the free market system. It allows us to have voluntary exchange. But it's necessary to have sound and solid money in order for that exchange to occur. But what happens when government attacks your money with inflation and steals the real purchasing power of that dollar? Well, we know what happens because it's been happening for thousands of years. It's not a new story. What happens when politicians want to spend more than exists? They create more cash. There are more dollars chasing fewer goods, which leads always to higher prices. And, you know, Thomas Sowell, the great economist, he said, the first law of economics is scarcity. People always want more than there is to have. The first law of politics is to ignore the first law of economics. And that's what politicians do when they create cash. It reminds me of the story of the Emperor Dionysius in the then Greek island of Sicily. And he kept running out of money. So what did he do? He took all the drachmas, which were the Greek coin, and where he saw 1, he stamped a 2. So he doubled the amount of drachmas that were in circulation. Now that gave him more money to spend, but it meant that the drachma was worth half as much. So the wage earner was earning half the money. And now I worry about sharing that story because I think Justin Trudeau might get some ideas, you know. If he runs out of money, he'll say, I can always make more. I'll turn loonies to toonies and toonies to fours, right? But that's what he's been doing. He's created about $400 billion of new cash in the last 2 years alone. Roughly a quarter of all the money created in existence today was created in the last 2 years, if you can believe that. So what's the result? The highest inflation in 30 years. We knew it would happen. I told the Finance Committee it would happen because it always happens this way. And so we have 5.7% inflation. Well, think about what that means to the value of your savings and your paycheck. If your paycheck stays the same for 4 years, and inflation is 6% in all 4 of those years, you've taken a 24% pay cut in your purchasing power. Now imagine if your boss said to you he's going to cut your pay by 24%. You'd say, take this job and shove it. But what happens when your government does that to you? That's what happens with inflation, or as I call it, Justin-flation, right? So what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to take back control of our money. This is how we're going to do it. 1, I'm going to phase out the deficit so we no longer need to print money. I'm going to cancel Trudeau's $100 billion slush fund of unnecessary spending that he wants to pile on top of the budget. 2, we're going to get rid of the infrastructure bank. Sure, we need infrastructure. We don't need another bank. All that does is pay bonuses to insiders and give guarantees of profits to construction companies who should be living and dying based on their own performance, not based on taxpayer-funded guarantees. So we will get rid of the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure bank. And here's another idea to save $1 billion. We'll defund the CDC. Doesn't sound like I need to do any convincing on that one. And furthermore, we're going to protect the purchasing power of your money against high taxes. I'm going to get rid of the wasteful and pointless and unsuccessful liberal carbon tax. You know, they told us the carbon tax was going to be neutral. You're going to profit from it, right? They said you're going to make money off of this tax, right? It's like that Nigerian uncle who sends you an email saying you just have to give over your bank account information and give him $10 and he'll deposit $1 million into your account, right? Oh, they said that this was going to make you all kinds of money. Well, just yesterday, the truth came out. The parliamentary budget officer published his report and said 60% of Canadians will pay more than they get back, be far worse off, and at the same time it drives jobs and opportunity out of this country. So we're going to get rid of the carbon tax, and we're going to restore the Bank of Canada's traditional mandate, which is to fight inflation and protect the purchasing power of our money, not to fund overspending by politicians. Instead of creating cash, we need to start creating more of what cash buys, build more homes, grow more food, and supply more Canadian energy to our marketplace. I will be incentivizing our municipal governments through infrastructure money to approve faster building permits so that we can build 1 million new homes in Canada. And I will sell off 15% of the 37,000 underutilized federal buildings so that they can be converted into affordable housing for our young people. We'll incentivize our provinces to mandate that their licensing bodies more quickly recognize the qualifications of immigrant doctors, plumbers, electricians, and others so that they can serve in our communities and we can actually get a family doctor for once in this country. We're going to remove the gatekeepers so that we can open the gates of opportunity. And that includes in our energy sector. We will repeal the anti-energy bill C-69 so that we can harvest our resources and become energy independent in this country again. Wouldn't it be nice to have an east-west pipeline right now? Wouldn't that be amazing? Of course, you can't get pipelines done with that bill. We're going to get rid of it and bring in a process so that those who want to build pipelines can get an answer within a short time period, like they do in other countries around the world, because pipelines are the safest way to transport energy. Canada makes the cleanest energy and most ethical oil on planet Earth, and we will build Canadian pipelines of Canadian steel to get Canadian energy to Canadian consumers, generating Canadian paychecks. And we're going to take real action to become energy independent. Today I made a very special announcement in St. John. I was there with your excellent Member of Parliament to announce that I will put in place a plan to end the importation of overseas oil to Canada within 5 years. And we have a very clear three-point plan that will allow us to do it. 1, I'm going to remove the gatekeepers to approve Newfoundland and Labrador's project of increasing its daily output of oil from 250 barrels to 650 barrels, which is more than enough to replace the 126,000 barrels of oil we're getting from abroad, and create an extra surplus that we can ship to Europe to get Europe off of Putin's oil. How does that sound for a plan? It will be energy by Atlantic Canadians for Atlantic Canadians. It will mean we take money away, we take dollars away from dictators and instead create paychecks for our people. That is the purpose of my plan. Second part of the plan is to allow for new corridors to get Western energy to Eastern refineries. Right now, the Americans are laughing all the way to the bank, because Westerners are forced to sell 99% of their exports into the US. So all the American refineries make big profits paying us below market rates for our energy. So we sell low in the West and buy high in the East. If we had energy corridors of pipelines and rail lines, we could sell Canadian energy to Canadian consumers, and both of them would be better off. That is my plan, my friends. Finally, we will impose a full ban on importation of oil from dictatorships with bad human rights records, who fund terrorism and who abuse the environment, so that the money can come to Canadians instead. I'll give you another example. Newfoundland is proposing now an amazing project that would pipe natural gas from the Jeanne d'Arc offshore oil field right to the coast, where it would be put on a floating vessel and cooled to minus 161 degrees. That's how you transform a gas into a liquid. You cool it down. We all remember that from science class, right? And what do we have in Canada? Lots of cold weather, right? Which makes it easier to cool a gas into a liquid. In the Gulf Coast, their temperature is 30 to 40 degrees higher. They have to expend more energy in order to do it. Here, we have a 30-degree advantage because it's so cold. In fact, Jake, you'll never believe this, but I was in Saskatchewan a few weeks ago. It was so cold, there were actually liberals with their hands in their own pockets. So we're going to cool down the gas, turn it into a liquid, put it on a ship, send it over to Europe, supply them with the energy that they need to feed their industries and heat their homes. And by the way, this will be the cleanest source of natural gas on Earth, because in Newfoundland they have emissions-free electricity with which to generate it. And that will create more of a market to generate more of that clean energy, which they can also use to manufacture things like hydrogen, which could be a fuel source in the future. See, this is the potential we have, my friends. If we get the gatekeepers out of the way, open the gates of opportunity to our energy workers. It's not just oil and gas that result. It will mean that we can mine more lithium, more graphite, more cobalt, so that those electric cars will be made out of batteries generated in an environmentally responsible way here in Canada, rather than generated and refined in China, burning coal. Isn't that a smarter thing to do for the environment? So we will take back control of our energy. And we're going to take back control of our freedom again in this country. Freedom for all of us. We're going to stop this process of demonizing our fellow citizens. Every time the Prime Minister sees someone with whom he disagrees, he attacks them. He calls our law-abiding and licensed firearms owners criminals, even though they've never broken a single law. Meanwhile, he does nothing to halt the flow of smuggling and criminals through the revolving door justice system. My government will target the real criminals, secure our borders, and start to treat our law-abiding and licensed firearms owners with the respect that they deserve. And we will respect freedom of speech again in this country. Trudeau has introduced 2 different bills designed to censor what you see and you say online. One of them would empower the CRTC, a bureaucracy in Ottawa, to decide what is Canadian. That when you open up your phone, you only see things that the government says is Canadian enough for you to see. But who decides that? I believe you should decide it with clicks, rather than them deciding it with their cliques, right? I think we have 38 million regulators of Canadian content. They're called Canadian citizens. They should be able to decide what they see and say online. Why is it that a CBC report from Washington about American politics, broadcast from the United States, that doesn't even mention the word Canada in it, is considered Canadian by the government? But the local lady here who runs a hockey association and makes a little video to tell the local people about a fundraising drive that they're doing here in a Canadian community is not considered by the government to be Canadian content. It's Orwellian, and it's clearly designed to direct everybody to look at government-approved content. They've got another bill which says it will protect you from harmful things that you might see on the internet. Let's be clear. We all think the government should prosecute criminal behavior online. If a child is abused, if money is stolen, if fraud is committed, all those things are criminal already. They're criminal if you do them in the physical world. They're criminal if you do them online. What they're talking about now is criminalizing things that are not actually crimes. That you say something the government deems might one day cause someone else's feelings to be hurt, that you could ultimately be censored from the internet or even charged criminally. That is nothing more than an attack on our freedom of expression. I will repeal these bills and restore freedom of speech right here across this country. And I will also use my platform as Prime Minister, the podium at which I speak, to stand up to the woke political correctness of the modern day. Have you ever heard of this expression, woke? Anybody heard of that? It's this new idea that is designed to divide people by race, by gender, and now by vaccination status. Carve everyone up into a different group. Get them fighting with each other. It's the oldest trick in the book, divide and conquer. The government thinks if you're afraid of your neighbor, well, then you'll give the government even more power to protect you, even if your neighbor is no danger to you whatsoever. And that is what this woke movement is really about. It's about tearing down our history, because if you remove a country's history, then you can replace it with a blank slate. If people forget that our history and our freedoms go back hundreds of years, they might be more inclined to give them away easily. The story of freedom in our tradition is 800 years old. It goes back to the Magna Carta, 1215. So 807 years to be precise. It's 807 years long, but it's only one generation deep. Once you lose it, it could be gone. And that's why it is the duty of every generation, the duty to itself, but also to those who will come next, to ensure that our freedom survives. It is a contract, as Edmund Burke said, between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born, to pass that freedom down the generations, the way our ancestors did for us, the way they spilled their blood on battlefields so that we wouldn't have to today. We have that duty, and we are up to that duty. And so, in the words of the great John Diefenbaker, when he signed our Bill of Rights, he said, "I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all of mankind." Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an act. How do you follow that, huh? Anyways, anybody that would like to have a picture taken, whatever, Jake and Pierre are going down here right now. And if you have anything, you'll probably mingle around, and if you want to talk, is that all right with you, Pierre? Absolutely. And absolutely? Okay, come on down.